Yate kwasanashe yajen arnidishet. Kitachigi nashneto hetlini bashichi, kachini dashachero, kachini dashanale. Toyate mini dole. Good afternoon. I just greeted you in my first language, which is Navajo, or Diné. We call ourselves Diné, which means the people. We're taught this formal way of introduction at a very young age so that we establish a kinship, a relationship with our audience, with everything around us, everyone and everything. It helps us to establish our place in the world and recognize how our being has a purpose and can make a difference. I'm honored to share this non-acknowledgement statement with you today. I'm already part of CSU's statement until Fort Collins adopts their own. The purpose of the statement is to show respect for the indigenous peoples and to recognize their enduring relationship to and respect for the land and everything within and upon it. Practicing acknowledgement can also bring awareness and understanding about peoples and histories that are often suppressed or forgotten. I'd just like to talk a little bit more about that before I read the statement. It's traditional to, whenever, just say you go to someone's house, you just don't go and do whatever you want in their home. You ask permission and you acknowledge them. And this is kind of the same way. A few years ago, they had a, crew, I think it was 17, that they had their conference at CSU. It was a big Christian organization, and we got invited to that, and they told me they wanted to acknowledge the elders that were here, and I was thinking, it didn't make sense to me at that time, and so I said, well, we have 3 elders that live here, Native American elders, and there's a Crow woman, Anita Morin, mother of Carrie Morin, you might know him, and then Audrey Wadena, she's Omaha, and then my husband, Bob Iron, and he was a Vietnam combat veteran, so we brought him in on his wheelchair, and they presented them gifts, and that was the first that I really heard about it in this area, to acknowledge people and to acknowledge the ones that live there, I guess. So this is the same way. A few years ago, we have our powwow here at the north side. I guess it's this way, the Aslan Community Center. And a few years ago, I went up the river back into LaPorte, and I offered tobacco and pollen and sage and cedar, and I offered it to the spirits, the ancestors that were here and that lived here before us, and asked them to help me to do this powwow. And it brought the prayers and the thoughts down the river, and comes right by here, and it was a good feeling at the powwow, really strong. So I've connected that as well. And at CSU, they had a CS Unity March back in 2017, I believe. Or 18, and we were a part of that. And that was the first time that the acknowledgement statement was brought to the attention of the people there. And Ty Smith, the Native American Cultural Center director, had attended a conference somewhere, and he's the one that said, hey, they did this over here, I think we should do that here. So he wrote part of that, and we were looking at what he had written and compared it to what we use today. And we took a lot of his words, so that's the history of it, and we've been working on it. We have a Native American Advisory Council at CSU, and then we all worked on it together, and then we presented it to the community and said, said, what do you think of this? And so they approved this. So this is part of that statement. So I'd like to read that now. We acknowledge with respect that the land we are on today is a traditional and ancestral homelands of the Hinanana, the Arapaho, Sisistis, Cheyenne, and the Nooch, Ute nations and peoples. This was also a site of trade, gathering, and healing for numerous other native tribes. We recognize the indigenous peoples as original stewards of this land and all the relatives within it. We must acknowledge that the founding of the city came at a dire cost to native nations and peoples whose land it was built upon. As these words of acknowledgement are spoken and heard, the ties nations have to the traditional homelands are renewed and reaffirmed. And CSU statement also has a second paragraph that pertains just to them, but if you're interested, just look up landacknowledgement.colostate.edu. But just another message, thank you for inviting me here. And just to say that we all must continue our journey of healing and reconciliation with all nations, with Mother Earth and all our Creator's blessings. We must also recognize that we are the new stewards of this land, and we need to take that responsibility seriously. Our future generations are depending on it. So thank you, and good job, everyone.
Thank you to Kit Baker in particular for inviting Jen to join us tonight. And without further ado, I'd like to introduce Phil Weiser, the Attorney General for the state of Colorado.
I want to thank you all for joining us here at Fort Collins Startup Week, getting a little earlier before the pitch night. I was one of the folks who helped start Startup Colorado back in the fall of 2011. And the idea behind Startup Colorado was to connect and to catalyze startup activity across the Front Range. And so we now have startup weeks, not just in Boulder, which predated 2011, but Denver, one of the largest in the world, in Colorado Springs, here in Fort Collins, and a number of other cities. Because this is an extraordinary entrepreneurial community here in Colorado. What I want to share with you today is a little bit of how this informs the times we live in and the opportunity for government to be innovative. I want to acknowledge two members of my team who are here, Diana Noyes, our Public Outreach Director. Please feel free to engage her afterwards, as well as Ann Lee, our Chief Transformation Officer. So in terms of what I want to talk about, I've got a few items on the agenda. First, a little bit about me. Second, where we are as a nation. Third, why Colorado is special, and finally, how governing needs to change. So first, a word or two about me. My experience here in Colorado was absolutely shaped by what a special community we have here in Colorado, most particularly the entrepreneurial community. I founded a center at the University of Colorado called the Silicon Flatirons Center for Law, Technology, and Entrepreneurship. And the idea behind this was we need interdisciplinary problem solvers. Lawyers, technologists, business people, people in government, working together, believing ideas matter. And my family is here, and we're raising our kids here because we believe in Colorado. It was that belief that led me to run for office to be your Attorney General. And I have to tell you, this is an honor of my life, having the chance to serve the people of Colorado. So let me talk a little bit about what makes this a challenging time. And a lot of this gets to a lack of trust. The first point I want to make here with respect to trust would be we are seeing less and less trust in our government, in our governing institutions. The figures are scary, but if you ask people, is your trust shrinking in the federal government, 75% of Americans say yes, it is. If you ask, is your trust shrinking in each other, 64% of Americans would say yes. Which means, by the way, how many people think it's harder to solve problems? A lot. Next point, and this is another painful reality check. This all comes from Pew Research. Next slide. Would be, what about different age groups? And painfully, the younger you are, the more of a low truster you are. So if you're 18 to 29, 46% of people would call themselves low trusters, have low trust in government. The older you are, the more trusting you have. That says something about the challenging demographics we're facing. We've seen a lot of these surveys about how much do you believe in democracy or a free market system. The numbers are heading south in terms of the confidence and belief. Next point here I want to make is, who do you trust? How many scientists are in the room? Come on, a few scientists. All right, good news for you guys. A lot of trust. Even the low trusters would say 75% of people have faith in scientists. Academics, college, university types, okay, even low trusters put 60%. Here's the bad news for me. I went from being an academic, 62%, to being an elected official, 27%, overnight. Now, part of it is people don't know where they get information they can believe in. When you ask people, are you confident you can have civil conversations with people who have different views than you, only 42% say yes. This is, again, a threat to the fabric of our republic. It's something we can do something about here in Colorado, which I'll get to. Finally, part of the problem is, again, the sources of information that are pulling people apart. How much do you get understanding elected officials? 65% of people say it's either very hard or somewhat hard to learn things from elected officials. So again, going from a university press elected official, I got a lot harder to follow. Talking with people you know is actually the most strong level of confidence. For a great podcast, and I apologize for my propensity to give podcast and book recommendations, Michael Lewis did one called Against the Rules, which maps out this challenge of trust. He's got one study of Navient, which is a student loan servicing. Anyone have Navient or student loan servicer? Okay, so we are investigating them for not actually serving people, but instead leading to people to pay more money. And he goes undercover, as it were, finding out how student loan servicers are told to get off the phone very quickly, not necessarily to solve people's problems. All of that contributes to the lack of trust that he explores in his podcast. So what makes Colorado special? Well, there was an article, it's now coming up on a year and a half ago, Can Colorado Save America? Roger Cohen, who wrote this, looked at a number of Colorado stories, and part of what he talked about is we here in Colorado do have this culture of working together to solve problems. Let me mention two quick examples today from northern Colorado of policy entrepreneurs working together to solve problems. Dr. Leslie Brooks has helped spearhead, along with others, something called COAST Law. How many people here have heard of COAST Law? Colorado, opioid, Synergy, Larimer, and Weld together, an integrated physical behavioral health solution to get people the support they need, including when they come from an ER or a jail, because the opioid epidemic is destroying lives here. I'll talk more about that in a little bit. Honestly, it's a national model. It's here in Larimer County. Number two, Juvenile Gun Safety Coalition. Emily Humphreys founded it here in Larimer County, getting the word out to secure weapons so that kids don't get their hands on it. That's policy entrepreneurship, solving problems here in Colorado. Our office has a very simple mission. Together, we serve Colorado and its people, advancing the rule of law, protecting our democracy, promoting justice for all. And we do that in several ways. Advancing the rule of law means even when the federal government violates the rule of law, we defend it. We need a fair census that counts everyone. That's what the Constitution says. We fought for it, and we won that last year at the Supreme Court. Next slide. I mentioned the opioid epidemic. I wasn't fully attuned to how devastating this was until I went on the road. As you'll see, Colorado has some areas that are very lightly colored, some areas that are medium, and some that are dark red. So you go to those dark red communities, and what you hear is 90% of people in the jails are addicted to opioids. They're losing people, overdose deaths, because often you have this vicious cycle where someone gets arrested because of their dependence on opioids. They go through withdrawal in jail, often not medication-assisted treatment, but literally because they're cold turkey. They leave, and they're 100 times more likely to overdose. Now, there are companies that helped contribute to this crisis. Take for Purdue Pharma, who lied to people about opioids, saying they weren't addictive, knowing they were, pushed this out. As more people got addicted, they were making more money. Well, now we're going to hold them accountable. And we're in litigation right now against them and the people who own the company. We're going to win these cases, whether it ends up being a settlement or litigated judgment, take the money and use it to support education and prevention, drug treatment and recovery, to help people, families, and communities get back on track. This year, we've got a chance to do something innovative, which is to end cash bail. The way cash bail works is, if you happen to get arrested, let's just say, for example, as I talked to someone today, you are dependent on opioids, you have a big substance abuse problem, you're totally high and drunk, you think you're in your own home, but you're in someone else's home. It happens. And then you're arrested. Well, what's going to happen to you? If you don't have money, you're stuck. You're in jail. And you stay there. And you stay. And you stay. And then finally you say, okay, I'll just take a plea deal because I got to get out. That's not justice. Pre-trial detention should be because you're a threat. Well, this person, the only reason they are a threat at all is because of their dependence. So let's treat that dependence, not keep them in jail where their lives can go off in another direction. We can fix this system this year in Colorado. We're living in a time when a lot of companies might take advantage of people, might not protect people the way they should. Take Equifax, for example. Didn't use basic safeguards to protect data that now that it's out there can compromise all of us. So we were part of a settlement holding them accountable to use that money to support better cybersecurity here in Colorado. But what really galls me are those companies who go to extreme measures and end up tricking people. Because people, particularly those older Coloradans, are more trusting. Take, for example, what CenturyLink did. They offer a price lock guarantee, $19.99. Then they add on top of that a 99-cent fee they call an internet recovery fee that they made up. And here's the really awful part. They keep raising that fee even though there's a price lock, up to $3.99, because people trusted that they got a price lock. So we held them accountable and they paid an $8 million fine. This week I was in Crowley County, which is a poster child on how not to manage water. What happened in Crowley County was that the water rights were 95% sold away from agricultural usage, and a few farmers got rich. The county has half the population it had 40 years ago, which means half the graduating high school class, half the cars sold. It just ripples through. And what's the largest industry in Crowley County? Anyone know? Not even close. They wish they had oil and gas. No, they sold their water rights. They've got very little agriculture. Prisons. Prisons. Now, I was also in Baca County where they have got a thriving hemp industry, and they've got wind power. And Crowley County is working on building their future too. But the point is, we've got to manage our water to work for the whole state. We can't have more Crowley counties. The real challenge we have is we've got to modernize our approaches to governance. Let me mention a few points on what that looks like. The first, sorry again for the book recommendation. We have to change. Change is hard. By the way, most people get government wrong. It's not about Republicans or Democrats. It's about innovation or inertia. And most time, inertia is going to win. People will often say, well, we've always done it this way. In my office, that's not good enough. What we say is, we are values-driven, and we've got 4 values. One is, we're principled. It's super important to us in this moment to operate, to build confidence in the rule of law. Number 2, we're public servants. We are here to serve the people of Colorado. We can never forget who we're working for. Number 3, we're innovative. We don't ask, how's it always been done? We ask, what's the best way to do this? That's why we have a Chief Transformation Officer. And finally, we're better together. Better together means that we need you. Bill Joy, founded Sun Microsystems, had this great quote. The smartest person working for you on your issue isn't a part of your team. They're out there somewhere else. Now, the way you get them working for you is by having a network mindset. I want all the people in this room working for the state of Colorado to solve the problems that we're working on. We need to crowdsource solutions on public safety, on how we manage our water, on how we protect consumers, on how we improve criminal justice. How do we do that? We're not afraid to try new things, and we see what happens. Again, book recommendation here, Lean Startup, great book. How many people here have read the book Lean Startup? All right, good turnout. It's a great book. We test, measure, iterate. Next, it's really important to recognize I don't view the world in a hierarchy. I view the world as a network. We have incredible connections here. We've got a spirit of collaboration. The reason the Gun Safety Coalition got started here in Larimer County, the reason this Coastlaw opioid integrated treatment program got started here is because there's a network, there's a culture of collaboration. That's how Colorado's a model for the nation. I mentioned Startup Colorado. Here's another example. It's CareerWise Colorado. Anyone here know what CareerWise Colorado is doing? Okay, a few people. It's developing skill-based training so you can graduate from high school or community college with valuable skills to get high-paying jobs. Because we've got a real skill deficit right now. Our education system isn't getting it done. The way CareerWise works is getting employers to offer apprenticeships to help address this need. Another version of this, by the way, would be a second chance employer network. When people re-enter after serving time in prison, we are giving them skills so they can re-enter with a job. We've got to do better here in Colorado. Here's a quote I'm really fond of. I'll give you the scripture version in a minute, but here's my quote here. Not everyone needs to do everything. Everyone needs to do something, and enough people need to do enough things. That's how we operate as a team. The scripture version comes from Ethic of Our Fathers, which says, you don't have the responsibility yourself to repair the world, but you're not free to desist from doing your part. So the question for all of us is, what can we do together? And I'm into this together stuff, which is why earlier this week I was in Southeast Colorado. Today I'm in Northern Colorado. I am committed to helping connections. My superpower probably would be making connections. So if all I do as Attorney General is make connections to help solve problems, I'm good. Because we can do so much together. This is an extraordinary state with an ethos of how do we work together. And with that, I welcome your thoughts, questions, and ideas. And as someone who's been a professor, I'm not afraid to call on people. Yeah?
So Phil, how has your experience as an entrepreneur changed your perspective as a PhD?
What I would say is my mindset is fundamentally one shaped as an entrepreneur. So I've helped found companies, founded different programs like Startup Colorado, and as I illustrated here, I am not afraid to do things that don't work. I'm afraid not to try new things. Now, I have to tell you, this is a formidable challenge because 500 people work in the Attorney General's office, many of whom hear the statement I just said and brace themselves for what's coming. One measure of success that I would judge myself by is 7 years from now, has the culture of the office changed so that Ann, our Chief Transformation Officer, has people knocking at her door saying, I want to spend 10 to 20% of my time working with you on transformation projects to help us do our work better. Because I believe the world is not composed of zero-sum games. So the zero-sum mentality is, oh, I can't have my team member working 10% on some other project because they're not going to be as effective for me. That's a zero-sum mentality. It's fundamentally wrong. I live in the win-win world. The win-win world says, by the way, if you don't give your team member a chance to work with Ann on transformation projects, you're going to lose her. You're going to get someone less good as her who you've got to train who will be half as effective. So try this math equation. You can have someone twice as effective, but you got to sacrifice 10% of that time, or you get someone half as effective. Sounds like an easy proposition. Sounds like a win-win proposition. So that's how it's affected.
So last fall, in the Allman case, the Supreme Court of Colorado ruled unanimously that Allman was given a illegal sentence and pointed to the fact that many Coloradans were also given these illegal sentences. And I know you requested them to re-examine that, and they said, we said what we were saying. So now we have a situation where there are thousands of Coloradans who are still underneath illegal sentences. They go to their lawyers and say, what's going on? And the lawyers say, well, I don't know. We're waiting to see what's happening. So my question for you is, what are you doing? What is your office doing to help resolve these people with illegal sentences? And also, whose responsibility is it actually to bring justice to this whole class of people?
It's a good question. I won't try to explain it all because it is really in the criminal procedure weeds. What I will say is we live in a system where it's a partnership between my office and district attorneys' offices. And so to answer your second or final question, district attorneys have the responsibility of making sure that justice is served and sentences are lawful. Our job was defending the practice of district attorneys up till this decision. They thought they could do what they were doing. They've now been told by the Colorado Supreme Court they've got to change it. So every district attorney's office has to figure out how they comply with this. And so that's the agency. And we will work with and make ourselves available as they are willing to think about what the best approaches are, but it's really in their hands.
But you have no influence over their decision?
It's up to them. Each one may do it differently.
Is there a time frame when they have to fix this?
I don't know if there's any specified time frame. That's a really good question. Now, presumably, you could have test cases where someone would come back and say, I've got a legal sentence, you got to fix it, and if the DA doesn't respond, that'll work its way up. But I would say the place to start is the district attorney's office, because they're the ones with the responsibility.
One final question.
Sure.
Do you have the capacity to ask the Supreme Court to give guidance on this issue?
Well, the Supreme Court has delivered their guidance. When we filed that was only the point you mentioned, we filed asking the Supreme Court to rehear it. We were actually asking to give more guidance because we weren't sure that the original ruling was going to be as, let's call it operational. And so the current ruling that they have stood with does leave a lot of questions open. And so that was our effort to get guidance out there from the Colorado Supreme Court. They declined to offer it. So the bummer is we're now back with district attorneys, each trying to figure it out, and it will continue to work its way through.
Thank you.
Yep.
It really spoke to me when you mentioned distrust of government. I think that is all over the place more than ever. And you're well aware you're in Larimer County, and right now we are working on local control rules for oil and gas development. I would enjoy hearing what your perspective is of the Colorado Oil and Gas Commission and all the things that are going there, and recent issues that we've had, seeing that the industry is underreported. And I want to hear what's going on in your head with all that.
Let me start with your last point and then try to touch on a few more. To the extent oil and gas companies have failed to pay the taxes that are owed, first, shame on them. Second, we're going to work with the Department of Revenue to go after that. Because paying your taxes is the price of living in a free society. We believe that everyone needs to pay their share. And we don't want to let people, whether companies or individuals, get away with failing to do so. And that's going to be an ongoing process, but the Department of Revenue has the responsibility to collect taxes. We represent them. We're committed to making sure we get all the appropriate taxes paid. With respect to what Larimer County is now doing, for those of you who are in the weeds on this one, last year Colorado passed a novel law to create a two-tier structure for oil and gas regulation, giving local governments authority to protect the public health, safety, and welfare of its citizens, with an overlay at the state level evaluating the appropriateness of permit applications. A lot of these local governments are now saying, how are we going to go about doing this? Because we have to oversee, for example, air quality issues, water quality issues, noise, and that is now in the very early days. I believe that people in Colorado have this ethos of working together to solve problems. How we regulate oil and gas is going to test that. It's going to start in communities like yours as the issue gets worked through and developed. It's way too soon to pass judgment on how this reform program is working. I can say, by my upbringing and philosophy, I'm an optimist, and I believe we will find our way through it. But we are really in early days. And just to give you one more detail, because I don't want to go too deep in the weeds, the Oil and Gas Commission is going to itself be transformed. It used to be like a part-time commission to a full-time professional commission, and that's set to happen this summer. So that's also part of this whole reform program. Thank you. Yes, Lisa.
During your campaign, you talked about working to end the lawlessness in Washington. How's that going?
To
End the lawlessness in Washington.
Yes. For a minute, I forgot we had a federal government. It is a super painful time because if you believe in the rule of law, you are watching, I think Lisa's word is right, lawlessness. Now, I will give you 3 examples, and I will, again, by my approach, be positive about it. First, the census case. What happened with the census was completely lawless. The Constitution, and I worked for Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg, who said, always keep a copy with you, so I've got one. It provides very clearly for an actual enumeration of the population, of everybody. Our Commerce Secretary said, I want to go ahead and ask people whether or not their immigration status is they're a citizen or are they undocumented. And they said they wanted to do this, wait for it, to enforce the Voting Rights Act. Something, by the way, this administration has shown no interest in really doing. So it wasn't credible on its face. And they went ahead and they did discovery. Lo and behold, you'll be shocked to hear, they had political motivation, which is they wanted an undercount of the census so that states like Colorado with a large, particularly Latino population, would not get additional representation. Well, we fought for a fair census and we won. And John Roberts was a swing vote, committed to the rule of law. Number 2, the Affordable Care Act. 700,000 Coloradans are protected by this law because they have a pre-existing condition. 400,000 people in Colorado have Medicaid because of the Medicaid expansion. All of that is on the line in the face of what is a ridiculous argument. The argument is because one provision, the individual mandate, they say is unconstitutional, they say strike down the entire law as unconstitutional. That's not the way the system works. If one part's unconstitutional, you strike that down and you leave as much as you can intact. We are defending the law and that important legal principle against the Department of Justice, just like the census case. I believe we're going to win that case too. In perhaps the most consequential case that gets to the essence of separation of powers, which is Congress has the power of the purse, and only Congress, the president decided to rewrite the congressional budget. Congress said, we're not giving money for a border wall. But the president said, okay, I'll just divert money away from military installations here in Colorado, among other places, to build this border wall. And now that action is being tested and will probably end up in the Supreme Court. So how's the lawlessness in Washington doing? It is facing the defense of the rule of law from states who have the ability to stand up against lawlessness. A few more questions. Yes?
Well, based on what you just said, and then talking about mistrust and all the slides that we saw, that how do you foresee Americans gaining trust? because I see my children who have no trust in the government. And, and I would agree that, our trust just keeps going down further and further.
This is probably like the most important question we have. How can we continue this experiment in self-governance, which depends upon trust? So I would say it starts at the local level. You all making a difference at the local level. I gave 2 examples. Here in Larimer County, the Juvenile Gun Safety Coalition that Emily Humphreys, who's now your new Criminal Justice Services Director, and Dr. Leslie Brooks, who's helped start Coast Law, which is an integrated response program to the opioid crisis. People in Colorado have been willing to give local governments, including Colorado Springs, including Weld County, including Grand Junction, more money for schools and transportation. We haven't gotten those votes at the state level. That says something. The closer whatever solutions are to the people, the more likely they are to be trusted. So the way we do it has got to be bottom up. It has got to be bottom up. And that's the way we can change the trajectory we're now seeing, because there are 2 futures. One future is all that toxicity and distrust goes bottom down, and we wipe out our current system of governance. I'm not sure what replaces it. The other story is we build trust, we build solutions from the bottom up, and that revitalizes American democracy. Michelle.
Right, so what is your best time management advice for American small business owners to help with all of this?
I've never gotten that question. Let me say a few things. First off, let me start with email. I'm a big fan of 0 email at the end of the day. If you don't finish your email at the end of the day, you will find yourself on one of those treadmills that you never get off. You're always behind. Now, there's a very interesting hard question, what to do about all that prior email. One option that some people have done is email amnesty. If I haven't returned your email, I'm not going to email me again and start over. So that's an option to consider. What I will say is I won't necessarily respond to every email immediately. What I will sometimes do is I will create a draft of my response. Another very important principle is you don't have to respond immediately, because sometimes that first draft or first response is not the one you want to send. Lincoln was great about this. Lincoln would write notes all the time and would say, written but never sent. So I would say respond, act on the email, file them away, but for many of them that require some more thought or are delicate, just leave them in draft and come back to the drafts folder to do that. So that's one time management technique. Another one is you've got to schedule time for yourself. You are better when you get enough rest, when you exercise, when you have time with friends and family. So you should schedule it. Ken Thier, who used to be head of DaVita, had this wild system. He gave himself half a point if he ate dinner with his kids, half a point if he was there like whatever it was, an hour before bedtime. So he'd get a point every night. And then he told his assistant, I need to get X number of points over the whole year. So she kept track. Now, again, this is not for everybody, but this was his model. He kept track of how he did it. Part of the problem that some entrepreneurs do is they will burn themselves out. And it's a marathon, it's not a sprint. So be smart about how you manage your time. And then the final thing for entrepreneurs in time management is it's got to be a team effort. Some of your best time will be spent mentoring, supporting, guiding other people. And the instinct to do it all yourself is the devil, because it's not sustainable, it's not scalable. So those are 3 tips I'd offer.
We have time for one last question.
There we go. Last question.
Meaning of life?
It's a great movie.
Will, if Governor Polis signs the death penalty, or repeals the death penalty, what will your recommendation be to him on the few men who are on death row?
My recommendation would be that they have their sentence commuted. Yeah. Basically, I do think Colorado, since the death penalty was reinstated, someone told me, was it one person had been put to death? And the chance that we put anyone else to death, I believe, is very, very small. The issue with the death penalty is it's very expensive to give the death penalty. History will look back at Colorado. I think the turning point will have been the James Holmes case. James Holmes did about as awful a thing as I can imagine. And a jury wouldn't give him the death penalty after a lot of money was spent in the face of a willingness to plead guilty with life without parole. That is what a jury felt was fair, and that is what the legislature thinks is fair, and I agree. We are about not to have a death penalty, and I don't see us putting anyone else to death in Colorado. I want to thank you all, and again, my final encouragement and plea is you are incredibly talented. You are living in a special community. The way we change our worlds and the way we build trust starts here and in communities all across Colorado. We have a special opportunity to make a difference. It is my honor to help connect with you and serve you. Thank you for all you're doing and will do. I really appreciate you. Thank you.